Thanks everybody for coming along tonight. My first words would be to thank and pay tribute to our three speakers, Garda Kami, Niamh Gordon and Ed McNally. I've read Garda and Niamh's work over the years with much, learned a huge amount from them and have been inspired by their untiring efforts in support of the cause of Palestinian freedom. Like all of you, I am impatient to hear what they are going to say, so I will myself be quite brief. There are really three broad points I'd like to make. The first is just to say a little bit about the production process. There were three of us who produced the first draft chapters and one of us on the writing team who did all the images. They were cut and pasted into one document, and then about 23, 24 readers in Boycott and beyond read the booklet very carefully, and all that feedback was integrated into what you have in your hands. So it truly is a collective labor. It is really written by Boycott, not by individuals within Boycott. The first thing then I want to say is the reasons for bringing out another edition for the booklet. And the first reason is that there is so much pro-Israel Zionist misinformation in circulation about Palestine-Israel generated by the parliamentary political parties, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats and Reform, and by the mainstream media led by the BBC. So that's essential to make the case for Palestinian self-determination loudly and clearly. And in the specific case of the academic boycott of Israeli universities, the misinformation and misrepresentation are especially egregious and therefore need to be combated energetically and in all contexts. One vivid example of such misinformation appeared last month when Universities UK, the body that is made up of 140 vice-chancellors running UK universities, made a public statement regarding the academic boycott. This is what they wrote. This was quoted in The Guardian on the 13th of September. They said, Universities UK has a long-standing public position of being committed to the free exchange of ideas regardless of nationality or location. As such, we do not endorse blanket academic boycotts, as this would represent an infringement of academic freedom. This is such a tired and false representation of what the academic boycott is all about. Since the very start of the academic boycott, Boycott, the BBC, the BDS movement have emphasized over and over again that the academic boycott targets institutions, not individuals, and that the academic freedom of individuals working at Israeli universities are in no way impeded by the boycott. The only requirement is that such Israeli academics have not themselves been involved in war crimes and genocide, which I'm sure you will agree is a reasonable reason to boycott them. So we have, one of the things we've done is we've posted copies of the boycott, of the booklet of Why Boycott Israeli Universities to all 140 vice-chancellors at British universities, bespoke letters pointing out, please read the booklet, educate yourself, this is not an infringement of academic freedom, and crucially, juxtapose what you read in the booklet with what you say on your equality, diversity and inclusion statements, your grand gestures about social justice, and think carefully about whose rights and freedoms are being infringed. You'll find that it's people supporting Palestine, not the spurious and arguments that are made out about protecting the academic freedoms of Jewish students. The second reason for bringing out the booklet again is that much has changed since 2007, and I just thought a snapshot of how things have become so much more difficult for the Palestinian freedom struggle, and just to register that, what a different world we were living in 2005, 2007. In 2005, just the political culture in Israel has become so much more right-wing. Bezalel Smotrich was arrested in 2005 in possession of 700 liters of gasoline on suspicion that he was about to participate in the blowing up of the Ayalon highway, and he was held in prison for 3 weeks. 2025, we move forward 20 years, 2 decades. He's Minister of Finance in the Israeli government, wielding enormous influence. Just last week, he was quoted in the Times of Israel saying, "There will be Jewish settlements in Gaza. Without settlements, Israel has no security. We have patience, but we have determination and faith, and with God's help, we will continue with our victories." That's an extraordinary shift, and it's terrifying. A second factor that is also equally bleak is that in 2005, US military aid contributions to Israel were $2.63 billion and an economic package of 360 million, so a total of about 3 billion. In 24-25, US aid to Israel is 21.7 billion. And if you add also the aid that goes from the US to the military funding to the wars in Iran, Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria, the total is 33.8 billion, a 30 billion increase in support for the State of Israel. These are very depressing realities that have to be confronted. On the other hand, I think we also have to take heart from the fact that the prospects for Palestinian freedom have improved. The struggle has been invigorated substantially. The first obvious point is that the scale of global opposition to Israel and the massive rise in support for Palestine is reflected in the growth of the number of countries recognizing its claim to independent statehood. In 1988, 73 nations recognized the state of Palestine. In 2011, it was 122, and now in the middle of 2025, it has increased to 157. I know that that can be nothing more than a gesture and be deployed strategically in order to take, instead of taking real action, but nonetheless, it is significant. The second thing to register is that public opinion in Britain has also shifted very, very sharply. It's turned decisively against Israel. I looked at YouGov polls in June 2005, and the pro-Israel and pro-Palestine sentiments of the British public were within a couple of percentages of each other, between 17 and 20% people. In the latest YouGov poll in October 2025, on the 6th of October that was released, only 15% now sympathize with Israel and 37% with Palestine. That's a shift of 22%. The proposition is, do you agree with the proposition, I sympathize with Palestine? Do you sympathize strongly? And do you sympathize somewhat? The combination of a great deal and somewhat actually now comes to 62% of the British population. I think what's really important from the point of view of Boycott and the BDS movement generally, there remains between 30 and 40% of the British public that says they don't know or don't care. Those are the people who we need to reach. The third success is we have to recognize that the BDS movement and the academic boycott movement has had many victories, and that many universities around the world have cut ties with Israeli universities. In Ireland, in South Africa, in Spain, in Belgium, the United States, Australia, Norway, Slovenia, and Sweden, and many more. I think the most telling admission that the BDS, the academic boycott movement, is affecting Israeli universities is expressed in a statement that the Israel's Association of University Heads released a couple of months ago. They said in the statement that since October 23, academics at Israeli universities had reported 500 cases of academic boycotts and difficulties with sustaining relationships with overseas institutions. So the Israeli universities themselves have a profound sense of anxiety, panic even, that they are losing the argument, that they are also being isolated increasingly. The next thing I just wanted to summarize very briefly. You all know this, but just to put it in a list, how do the Israeli universities deny Palestinian rights? There are 4 important ways in which they do. The first is they sustain the military-industrial complex by providing the research and development for the arms industry and by training Israeli soldiers in the warfare of occupation. Secondly, they function as sites of surveillance, enforcing apartheid control, and as ramparts of settler colonial encroachment into long-established Palestinian communities. Thirdly, they serve as the Praetorian Guard of Israel's ideological war against pro-Palestine advocates and critics of the State of Israel, producing a constant flow of propaganda for both internal and global consumption. And fourthly, they discriminate systematically against Palestinian students and staff, denying Palestinians the academic freedoms enjoyed by Jewish Israelis pursuing university studies. And finally, I just want to say something specifically about the collusion of Israeli universities during the war on Gaza. We all have read and are aware of the scale of the devastation and the specific focus on the education system, that within 100 days of the start of the genocide, 63% of university buildings had been razed, 5,479 students had been killed, 261 teachers, 95 university professors, and large numbers injured. And in the process, 700,000 school students and 88,000 Gazan university students no longer had access to education. They no longer had buildings where they could attend lectures. And this destruction, that was the first 100 days. This has obviously intensified and continued. This, as you will know, is referred to as scholasticide, and a term coined by Karma Nabulsi, which describes Israel's ongoing attacks on Palestinian education, attacks dating back to the founding of the state in 1948, but escalating from systematic destruction to total annihilation during this onslaught. Now, what have Israeli universities said through all this period in the last 2 years? They're very much in sync with Israeli public opinion. You will also probably have looked at the recent opinion poll of Israel that was published in Haaretz on the 3rd of June 2025, which recorded that 82% of Israeli Jews agree with the statement that the transfer expulsion of residents of the Gaza Strip to other countries is a good thing, and 54% were very supportive. They agreed strongly with that statement. And the principles at Israeli universities are in sync with that sentiment. They put out statements. The Israel's Association of University Heads put out regular statements, and I've followed all of them through over the last 2 years, and they repeatedly echo Israel's right to defend itself. Hamas uses civilians as human shields. Word for word, they repeat Netanyahu's mantras. Never once have I ever, in any of these statements, either individual university heads or collectively, have they expressed compassion for the killing of Palestinian university students and staff, let alone for the many other tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians killed. They are 100% lined up with the Israeli state's project. I'm just going to end off on a slightly different note. The arguments in the booklet are all carefully researched, and what we've done is we've drawn very closely on the documents of international human rights organizations like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, legal institutions, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. And we believe that the most powerful way of making these arguments is by resorting to these respectable, authoritative sources producing evidence. But I wanted to just end off by making a slightly different appeal, with slightly different words. The campaign, and this is, I think, the most important thing perhaps that I'm going to say, that it's important that this campaign was initiated and inspired by the Palestinian people. On the marches here in Britain, those of us who've gone, we have chanted, in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. The words capture perfectly the sentiment of solidarity with the Palestinian cause and the global scale of the Palestinian freedom struggle. But at the same time, no one campaigning in Britain for the liberation of Palestine ever forgets the prolonged suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and in enforced exile across the globe. So my closing words, I just want to read you a very short poem by a Palestinian university student, which encapsulates what's at stake. The poem is by Basman Darawi, who was a graduate in physiotherapy in Al-Azhar University in Gaza, who's currently living in exile in Egypt. It's called A Degree in Surviving Assaults. As I say, it's just a short poem, and I'll end with this. If there were a degree bestowed for surviving armed assaults, I would have earned it with honors, magna cum laude. I'm living through my fourth now, although I'm not sure if I will make it to graduation. If you test me, I bet I'd ace the exam. I can tell the difference between the voice of an F-16, F-35, and Apache helicopter. I can immediately detect whether a sound is the shelling of tanks or bombing from airplanes. But with my degree has come different types of syndromes: phobia of the night, hypersensitivity to the sound of moving chairs or really any banging object, insomnia from anticipating death. I have also learned a few truths. First, the world is hypocritical, yet it is full of hidden gems, good people willing to speak out. Second, actual death is when you don't stand up for what is right. And third, no matter what, Palestine will always be my home. Now, BRICUP have tried to line up with the good people willing to speak out, to stand up for what is right. And the booklet is a small part in the struggle to ensure that tens of thousands of Palestinian students like Bazwan Darawi will no longer be restricted to degrees in surviving assaults, but will be free to pursue their studies in safety and to contribute to their communities in a free Palestine.